I'm sleeping downstairs. I'm sleeping on the couch. This is it. This is over.
I need another drink. So today, Jeffrey and I are going to start a new series called Movie Wars, in which we discuss a movie that one of us loves.
And one of us doesn't love. So today, why is Up the most overrated Pixar movie?
That's ridiculous. I will not stand for that. I love the story of this film so much. I feel like its concepts about grief and handling death and learning to kind of move on from those things to kind of live your life the best way you can. I think is something that Pixar hadn't really explored before. And I think this was one of the more serious tones that a Pixar movie took. And I just commend it so much for that.
I agree that some of that stuff is in there. I just think that it abandons it in favor of a lot of like kids stuff. Like there's a certain point in one of the conversations about Soul is that is this really a kids film? Is this like more of an adult's film? And Up, I think, is distinctively a kid's film. The first 15 minutes of Up is pretty emotionally affecting, and it's a stepping stone for, I think, the later, more experimental stuff that they do, things that brought us Inside Out, things that brought us Soul. And maybe I'm getting too caught up in comparisons, but I think in the chronology of Pixar films, this is sandwiched between WALL-E and Toy Story 3, and they're so much better than this movie. I don't really know how this is the first Pixar movie that got a Best Picture nomination. And we watched, actually, we should say for the audience, we watched WALL-E the same day that we rewatched Up. And I think WALL-E, not to turn this about WALL-E, I think WALL-E is a much better film.
I think you are missing a lot of the points about this movie. And I
Tell me.
completely disagree. Oh, I will tell you, because there's a lot of detail in this film that I don't think you recognized. So, for example, I can give you one is Russell. When they're kind of trying to get the house to the other side of the fall, where the falls are, and Russell's looking at these rocks. And he points to the rock and he says, that one looks like a turtle. I immediately remembered in the beginning of the movie, in that kind of montage scene with him and Ellie, when they were younger and they were looking up at the clouds. And what happens to be up there, and Ellie points out, one of them is a turtle. And so I think in that moment,
That's detailed filmmaking to you?
yeah, because it's something that it's the purpose.
Oh, God.
The purpose is that Russell is a metaphorical character for the relationship that he had with Ellie. And so Carl's going through this experience of learning that once again, something that he had forgotten her death. And I think that's what makes it so special.
I understand that. I think that's fine. I don't think that that's that abnormal or that special about filmmaking. I will say that
I think that's ridiculous. Sorry, I'm going to point you out on that because we just literally did a whole movie review on Soul. And that's one of the things we love so much about it was these metaphorical things that told you something about the characters themselves.
that's not metaphor, that's callback.
Yeah, but Soul does the same exact thing.
No. Soul does it in this way that captures kind of the more like ethereal, kind of the unexplainable things about life that's informing all of those things. I think Up is way more on the nose, and that's some of the problem I have with it. But to go to what I was gonna say is that it does have these themes about grief and these themes about getting older that are really radical for a Pixar movie at the time, considering this came out 11 years ago. But it's undermined by dogs yelling squirrel. Like there's just so much like lowest common denominator humor in here that just kills any power for me.
But that's why I recognize that in the terms of the chronological order of these Pixar movies is that you're busy comparing it to Inside Out or Soul, when this is kind of like the building foundational blocks of...
Yeah, but they made something perfect a year before this movie.
Yeah, but it was
that doesn't have any of these trappings.
I don't understand. The bug in WALL-E doesn't really have any emotional weight or carrying. It's just this cute little figure, and you're here explaining away that.
But that's a tiny
when you
little...
can't notice that within...
That's a tiny little plot point that's cute and emotionally affecting. Like, I don't find... It's hard for me to feel emotionally affected in a film when I feel like I'm really caught up in its plot mechanics. And a lot of this film is manufacturing danger for me to feel like a kid's movie. And I just don't like that. Like the last half hour of this movie, I think is like borderline a disaster.
The whole point of the danger aspects of it is because there's this experience that Carl and Ellie always wanted, was to go travel and kind of experience something that was something that they didn't really
I don't know.
completely
I don't
understand.
buy that.
And
I don't buy
Carl,
that.
and within this journey, Carl comes to the understanding that yeah, that adventure was what it was, but it wasn't what he really needed.
Maybe
And the
this-
adventure,
oh,
when
sorry.
he opens the book at the end, and he sees that Ellie wrote past the page what I'm gonna do in the future or whatever, and he sees all these moments about them getting married and them like swinging on swings and like kind of all these intimate special things. Like that was the life. And that was something Carl was holding on to, was he thought that the life was the adventure of going out somewhere, and he didn't have to do that.
I understand the meaning of that, and I do think that that's powerful. I just think it's undermined by this movie just copping out to cater to audiences.
I don't think it copped out at all. I think all the little accessories that you deem to make it a kids movie have a play and a role in Carl's perspective.
Dogs yelling squirrel.
Okay, the dog is the only one I'll give you. I watched this film and I was like, I don't understand the dog and why it's here beyond comedic relief.
This movie definitely does not benefit from us having seen Soul so recently, and it is unfair for me to compare a film that's 11 years after the progression of Pixar to this movie.
Well, I
But-
appreciate that.
But I will, because I know that this film is a stepping stone for them. But I will say that and even though it's a callback to the beginning of the film and it kind of brings it full circle in kind of a script way, when this film introduces the villain in the third act, it's where it completely loses me. If this was a buddy movie that, that kind of formula that Pixar has a lot of these odd couples that are together and they end up changing each other for the better, I would be pretty on board for that. And I know this movie is that, but it gets caught so much in this villainy kind of thing where they're trying to capture Kevin, who, by the way, Kevin is the thing that changed about me. I find Kevin very funny now. I find
Hysterical.
I find the dogs much stupider than I've ever found them, and I find Kevin pretty funny. But I will say, I think the villain really screws this movie up because it sends it on this unnecessary kind of adventure, manufactured danger thing where I feel like I'm in a script, where I feel like I'm in a boardroom where people are saying, we have to get suspense for the kids that they think things aren't going to work out. But of course, we know they're going to work out as adults.
I feel like that's the case with every Pixar movie, though. They always add tension to try to add it, but it's a Pixar movie and you know where it's going. You know it's going to end in a happy place.
No, I know, but I think that this film just keeps going over it again and again. It's too elongated. They get away from the villain, and then they capture Kevin, and then they have to go get Kevin. And along the way, there are all these little things that's like, oh, it's not going to work out. They're hanging off a cliff. Like, it's too kid for me. I mean, Wall-E
Because after
Wall-E
that
has
aspect-
like one or two of those moments, but they don't have 13.
But this makes no sense for me, because the reason Kevin got caught was because Carl had no connection of caring there. And so the reason he went back was because he finally experienced his need to care.
I know, it could have been done without the plot mechanics, though.
All right, so I know you keep calling these plot mechanics, but I feel like these plot mechanics, again, just have so much more in-depth detail than you realize. I love how when him and Russell first interact with the storm and kind of things are flying away, like, he's not busy trying to figure out how to keep the house from going down. What he's doing is he's like kind of picking up all these materialistic things, like the picture of Ellie, trying to get the chairs back to where they were. He's like kind of grasping for this life that he had before that he just can't get back. And I think it's when it comes full circle at the end and he decides to start throwing these things out of the house so he can make the house lighter weight, so he could go back and he could save the bird,
I like that
Kevin.
metaphor. I do like that metaphor. And I like that he realizes the most important thing he has is the thing that's in his mind and what he had with Ellie, and not the things that's in his house.
Exactly. Like, those things will always be there in his heart, and I think the book does such a great representation of that.
Yeah, and when you're really emotionally affected by that, and then a dog does a chipmunk voice, you feel like the movie is not taking grief very seriously.
Obviously, the dog isn't the best part of this movie, but there's still some connections there I think that could be made. I think it's nice to have kind of this emotional kind of film being broken up with a little bit of comedy.
I'm okay with that. I mean, so I guess you could make the same argument about Soul, that Soul doesn't need its whole, like, he's trapped in the cat thing, But I just don't feel like they overuse it nearly as much as the dog thing.
So this is very interesting because you keep comparing this movie to Soul, which
Oh.
is nearly 12 years later.
Yeah,
Anyways,
and Soul is so much better.
but one of the funnest thing you loved about Soul was those cute little pre-souls, the little souls before
yeah.
they become
So here's the
little
thing:
baby souls.
it's not used as a crutch, and I like how well it fits into the plot and how funny it is. I don't find the humor in this movie really funny. I don't find it witty. I don't find it as part of the whole. And it really gets down to my issue of like Up is like not a bad movie. Like if it's a movie that came out tomorrow and you and I reviewed it, I would probably give it like a B minus. But like
It's ridiculous.
I think that it's given this prominence in the Pixar canon that I don't really understand. Especially, once again, it's sandwiched between two of the best Pixar movies ever made, and they were really capable of making things that were really affecting for a wide variety of age groups. And I just don't think they achieved it here the way they achieved it in WALL-E and the way they achieved it in Toy Story 3. Do you think that that's fair? Do you like the, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but do you like those two films that sandwich between a little better than Up?
So I would say WALL-E for sure. I mean, WALL-E is probably my favorite Pixar movie.
Yeah.
So
Movie rules.
yeah, but that doesn't mean I think in comparatively like that doesn't mean I don't love this movie. So I think there's a place for this movie in my mind. Like yeah, oh yeah, I don't love it as much as WALL-E, but that doesn't mean I don't love it. I love it nearly just as much, just
Sure.
at a little bit lower level.
Yeah, I think that the argument that this is a stepping stone is undone by the films that surround it. Because the films that surround it are so good.
Well, my argument for it being stepping stone was dealing in its subject matter, which was taking a very serious subject matter, something about grief and death, and trying to make something wonderful of it. That's something that Pixar hadn't done before. So you can't expect it to be a WALL-E, or you can't expect it to be a Toy Story 3 when it had nothing to build off it. I mean, Toy Story 3 had 2 films prior to it to build this emotional weight. Especially the end of Toy Story 3 right there is literally about the leaving behind of your toys with Andy and passing them on to a next generation. And that scene is what makes that movie so emotional.
Yeah.
But that scene would not exist and that emotional weight would not exist without the 2 films before it. And if the most emotional thing about Toy Story 3 is that Andy has to give away these emotional toys that he loves for his entire childhood compared to somebody who's, lost their spouse and has to learn kind of how to move on from that in whatever way that they can, I think is just so much more ambitious, and I appreciate that so much more.
Yeah, and I mean some positives. I do. I mean the character of a grumpy old man I think is just ripe for Pixar humor, and it is pretty funny. Like the first half hour of this movie is pretty funny. Oh, that does get to something I didn't get the chance to talk about. Is the tonal shifts don't work as well in this movie as other Pixar films for me. We come out of that really devastating 10-minute montage at the beginning of the movie. And we immediately go into like grumpy old man humor, and I don't know, it just didn't work that well for me. I was still like coming down from the emotions of the montage that I wish I was given like a little more time for it to go into being its conventional animated movie self.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I don't know, because I love so much that first shot, like when it comes back to kind of present day. And you see him coming down the stairway.
That shot is great. I just wish it was placed somewhere else because it's so funny.
But it's so funny.
It's so funny.
But I think that that was definitely such a tonal shift. But it was just kind of the shot that's just very static, and you're just kind of seeing his grumpiness in that one little shot, and it kind of explains a lot.
I love that shot of him going down the stairs. I think it's really funny. It doesn't work for the placement in the film for me.
Well, where was it supposed to happen? Later on when he's flying through the clouds?
I don't know.
to
His
go burn the
wife
house?
died 5 seconds ago. Like I gotta come down
In
from
a
it.
montage. All right, and that's it for our first episode of Movie Wars. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you've seen Up, let us know in the comments. Do you agree with Geoff? Do you agree with me?
And if you hate me this time, just imagine Matt's opinion on Pulp Fiction, which we'll talk about next time.
Oh, Lord.